Chapter 12, Montreal. The man on the cell phone told Ambler to be at the northwestern corner of Dorchester Square at 11 a.m. Arriving early, Ambler took a cab to the corner of Rue Cypress and Rue Stanley, a block away, and did reconnaissance. The Sun Life building on Dorchester, a Beaux Arts behemoth, had once been the largest building in the entire British Empire. Now it was dwarfed by modern skyscrapers, many of which were clustered around Dorchester Square. Indeed, that was why Dorchester Square made Ambler nervous. It was overlooked by too many buildings. He was carrying shopping bags from Place Montreal Trust, had a camera around his shoulder, and looked, he hoped, like just another tourist. After loitering in the side streets, he satisfied himself that he saw nobody suspicious in Dorchester Square proper, and he ventured into it. The square's walkways were perfectly cleared of snow, several straight paths intersecting with a central circle where a statue of one Sir John A. Macdonald, the country's first prime minister, looked out. Another monument honored Canada's role in the Boer, B-O-E-R, War, and not far from it was a Catholic graveyard for victims of some early 19th century cholera epidemic. The stones were weathered, their lichened, darkened hues, like L-I-C-H-E-N, set off by the white snow. Towering over it all was a steel and slate erection of the Imperial Bank. In front of the Dominion Square building, a massive structure in the Renaissance Revival style, a red bus marked Le Tram du Montreal had come to a stop. However much he reconnoitered, it was clear the critical elements could change at any moment. Was that why Osiris's controller had chosen it? Peering through the camera lens, Ambler scanned the hundreds of windows visible from the various office towers. Most were designed not to open. Those that could open were closed, given the weather. Though he had dressed warmly, the temperature was in the lower 20s, and his ears were beginning to freeze. He heard footsteps coming toward him, purposeful ones, and whipped around. "Excuse me, mister." Ambler saw an elderly couple dressed in bright down-filled jackets, their white hair tousled by the wind. "Yes," Ambler replied, trying to keep his voice bland and curious. "Would you mind taking a picture of us?" The man handed him a yellow disposable camera, the sort sold at any drugstore, with Sir John Macdonald in the background. "Okay?" "All right," Ambler said, embarrassed by his suspicion. "You American?" "From Sacramento, but we were here on our honeymoon. Guess when that was?" "Can't guess." Ambler tried not to sound distracted. 40 years ago, the wife squealed. "Well, congratulations," Ambler said, squeezing the button on the top right of the camera. As he stepped forward to frame the picture, he noticed something. A person stepping behind the statue a bit too quickly, as if he did not want to be seen. Ambler was perplexed. It was an amateur's mistake, and surely he was not dealing with amateurs. He handed the disposable camera back to the elderly couple, and suddenly took a few long strides toward the statue's pediment. A young man, no, a boy, probably 14 or 15, shrank away. "Hey," Ambler said, as neutrally as possible. "Hey," the boy said. "So what's the deal?" "I think I screwed up," the boy said, speaking with a slight Quebecois accent. He had a pronounced nose that he might one day grow into, and short, spiky blonde hair that was obviously bleached. "Nothing you can't make right, I bet." Ambler's eyes did not leave the boy's face. He was attuned to every shifting expression. "You weren't supposed to see me yet? Not until 11 a.m., the boy said. "Who has to know?" The youth brightened. "So you won't tell?" "Why would I? Don't you think I already know?" "It's just that your friend told me it was a birthday surprise, like some sort of treasure hunt, maybe." "Tell me what you're supposed to tell me. I'll act surprised. Promise." "You gotta," the boy said anxiously. "How much is he paying you? I'll pay you the same." Now the boy was grinning. "How much is he paying me?" he repeated, stalling. "Right, 40. The boy was a clumsy liar. Ambler raised an eyebrow. 30. Ambler maintained a look of skepticism. 20. The boy finally corrected himself. Ambler peeled off a 20 and gave it to him. "Now then, what were the instructions?" "Instructions were, the rendezvous has changed. You're supposed to meet in the underground city." "Where?" "Le Promenade de la Cathedral, Cathedrale." The boy said, "But if there's a surprise for you, you got to remember to act surprised." Someone with a mind for metaphor would find it either apt or ironic that beneath Christchurch Cathedral was a vast upscale shopping mall, the Promenade de la Cathedral. Famously, the cash-strapped Anglican diocese had bailed itself out by selling the land underneath. "Upon this rock thou shalt build a church" had been translated into the language of a commercial era, where a church had to support itself by selling the rock on which it stood. Ambler had just taken the escalators down to the promenade and was trying to orient himself in the cavernous mall when he felt a pair of hands on his shoulders spinning him around. A burly, ginger-haired man smiled cheerfully at him. "Face to face at last," the man said. Ambler did a double take. He knew this man. Not personally, but by reputation. Many people did. His name was Paul Fenton, and his reputation was as murky as his gaze was clear. Paul Fenton, a prominent American industrialist who first made his name as the founder of a Texas-based electronics firm with major defense contracts. But his business concerns had expanded a great deal since then, and by the late 80s, he had earned notoriety in certain circles for funding right-wing insurgencies and counterinsurgencies around the world. Among the beneficiaries of his patronage were the Contras in El Salvador, Renamo in Mozambique, and UNITA in Angola. To some, he was a patriot, a man whose loyalty was to his country rather than the almighty dollar. To others, he was a dangerous zealot who played fast and loose with the laws governing the foreign export of munitions, reminiscent of the businessmen who had backed the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion of the early 60s. That Fenton was a savvy and aggressive entrepreneur was disputed by no one. "You are Tarquin, aren't you?" Fenton asked. He took Ambler's silence for assent and extended a hand. Yet the question had not been rhetorical. There was a measure of uncertainty. Fenton had not known what he looked like. Ambler took Fenton's hand and stepped forward, speaking in a low, harsh voice. "It's idiotic to meet me in public this way. You're too goddamn recognizable." Fenton just winked. "I find people don't see what they don't expect to see. And I'm not exactly a Hollywood celebrity. Besides, sometimes the best place to hide is in a crowd, don't you find?" He took a step back, gestured around him. "Welcome to the world's largest underground pedestrian network." Fenton's voice was a honeyed baritone. His skin was ruddy, weathered, large-pored, yet oddly smooth, possibly the result of dermabrasion. His hairline was recessed into a widow's peak, though the areas of recession were dotted with tiny clumps of hair arranged almost geometrically, like doll hair. A man with a passion for self-improvement, then. He looked athletic, rugged. He also looked rich. There was a sleekness to him, a warrior who would spend one weekend playing polo in the Argentines, another running Abrams tanks through Chad, and the next getting mineral salt scrubs at a Parrot Cay spa. Rugged, weathered, but moisturized. The visage of the billionaire tough guy. "The underground city," Ambler said. "Perfect place for the underground man." Fenton, he knew, had not been exaggerating. The so-called underground city consisted of 20 miles of passageways and included 1,600 boutiques, a couple of hundred eateries, dozens of cinemas, Despite the freezing temperatures above, the underground city was pleasantly warm and brightly lit. He looked around. Long arched skylights, several tiers of escalators, and balconies that overlooked the enormous volume all contributed to a sense of spaciousness. The underground city linked the upscale shopping galleries of COURS Mont Royal to the Eaton Center and extended through the arcades-filled complex DESJARDINES and even to the PALAISDESCONGRES, the hulking convention center that straddled the Ville-Marie Expressway like some gargantuan of steel, glass, and concrete. Ambler realized why Fenton had chosen the venue. It was to provide Ambler himself with reassurance. The risks of violence would seem small in such a public place. "Tell me something," Ambler went on. "Are you actually here by yourself, a man of your stature?" "Why don't you tell me?" Ambler glanced around him, sweeping across dozens of faces. A square-faced man in a drab wax duffel coat, mid-40s, short hair. Another 20 feet to his left, looking much less comfortable in much more costly apparel. A double-breasted camel's hair topcoat, the slacks of a dark flannel suit. "I see just two, and one of them's not used to this sort of posting." Fenton nodded. Gillespie's basically a secretary, good with the maitre d's and such. Fenton nodded at the man in the camel's hair topcoat, who nodded back, coloring slightly. "But you were going to tell me about Osiris, and this doesn't seem the ideal setting for a I don't know how to say that word. Tete. "I know just the place," Fenton purred and led Ambler to an extremely exclusive-looking clothing boutique, a little farther down the Trotso walkway. In the window was a single dress, mainly iridescent purple shot silk, with the seams showing and basting threads visible in sloppy green loops. It looked as if it were a garment that was still being made, sort of thing that tailors sometimes display in their shops. But Ambler realized it was the finished garment, some high-styled deconstructed look that no doubt wowed the fashion press when worn by a slinkly anorexic model on a runway. A small sign of etched copper gave its name, Système de la Mode. Again, Ambler was impressed with Fenton's choice of venue. This one was cunningly designed to offer both reassurance and privacy. The store, with its intimidating and RECHERCHE offerings, was visible to passers-by, but not one in 1,000 would actually dare to come in. At the entrance there was the usual anti-theft portal, the two plastic-clad towers, though placed a little farther from the door than was usual. A low beep started when Ambler approached. "Sorry about that," Fenton said. "Probably doesn't like your camera." Which meant it wasn't an inventory control portal at all. Ambler removed his camera and stepped through. "Actually, if you could just stand there for a moment longer," Fenton said apologetically. Ambler did so. The door stuck closed behind him. "You're good to go," the burly industrialist said. "Welcome to my humble little shop. You might not think it's my speed, but if you were a fashionista, you'd be damn impressed. There isn't a single price tag in this place that doesn't have a comma." "Get a lot of customers?" "Nary a one," Fenton said, his cheeks broadening in a moisturized smile. "We're almost never open. And when we are, I've got the world's scariest shop girl. Bridget's her name, and she specializes in making people feel like they've got shit on their shoes. She's out to lunch at the moment, and I'm sorry you won't get to meet her. Because she's something, Bridget is. She doesn't exactly tell folks that they're not worthy to be shopping here, but they get the message." "I get the picture. If you're trying to set up a safe house, I guess it's more discreet than a big sign saying, 'Keep out.' And let me guess, the door tower isn't really for inventory control, it's bug repellent." "Total wide spectrum, real powerful. We test it all the time. Never been able to sneak a listening device through it. More pleasant than having to strip people naked and do a cavity search. More effective, too. Not that it would even matter if they did. Go check out the window glass. Ambler walked over to the storefront glass. Peering closely, he made out a fine mesh metal screen within the glazing. It looked ornamental. It was, in fact, functional. This whole place is a screen room? He marveled. A screen room was a space enclosed by a grounded ferromagnetic mesh or gauze. The shielding blocked the transmission of any radio frequency signals. You got it. See that shiny back wall? 12 layers of lacquer, 12, with each layer polished before the next layer is applied. All done by real artisans, and underneath those 12 layers, plaster and metal gauze. You're a careful man. Which is why we're meeting face to face. You talk to someone on the phone, you can never know whether you're just talking to him, or to him and his tape recorder, or to him and whoever might have a digital intercept. I'm a big believer in compartmentalization. See, do whatever I can to keep the information partitions in place like the trays of a TV dinner. The mogul chuckled contentedly. It was important to him that Ambler be impressed with his precautions. Keep him on the defensive. In that case, how do you explain what happened to Osiris? Anger flared in Ambler's voice. Fenton's ruddy face paled a little. I guess I was hoping we wouldn't focus on that. Ambler saw a salesman put off his stride, but what was he selling? Listen, what happened to Osiris was a goddamn tragedy. I've got a crack team looking into it, and though we don't have answers yet, we'll have them soon. The man was a prodigy, one of the most remarkable operatives I've had the privilege of knowing. Save your eulogies for the funeral, Ambler sneered. And he was a big-time admirer of yours, you should know that. Soon as it went on the squawk that Tarquin was out and about, Osiris was the first one who said I needed to reach out and bring you in. He knew that where I'm concerned, on the loose just means on the market. Ariadne, Ariadne thread. Find out where it leads. You seem to know a lot about me, Ambler said, the comment a prod. Exactly what did Paul Fenton know? Everything and nothing, it seems. Tarquin's the only name anybody has for you. You're exactly 6 feet tall, plus whatever your shoe heels add. Weight, 190 pounds, age 40. Brown hair, blue eyes. He smiled. But those are just facts, data. Neither you nor I is likely to be overimpressed with data. Keep him talking. Ambler thought about the long afternoons he used to spend fishing, the alternating rhythms of letting out the line and reeling it in, tiring the big fish by letting it swim against the drag. You're too modest. Ambler prodded further. I think you know a lot more than you're saying. I've heard tales from the field, all right. From Osiris. Others, too. I got a lot of contacts. You'll learn that about me. Not many people I don't know. Among people who count, I mean. Fenton paused. Obviously, you had some powerful enemies and some powerful friends. I'd like to be one of them. Fenton grinned again. Shaking his head. You impress the hell out of me, and not a lot of people do. In my book, you're a goddamn wizard. A magician. Poof, the elephant vanishes from the stage. Poof, the magician's gone. Cape and wand and everything. How the hell do you manage that? Ambler sat down on a brushed steel stool, studying the industrialist's smooth, ruddy face. Are you my enemy, or will you lead me to my enemy? How do you mean? Ambler kept his voice low-key, bored. Professional secret, huh? They told me that Tarquin was a man of many gifts, but I had no idea. Incognito ergo sum, huh? You realize we ran your prince? Ambler flashed on the water tumbler that Osiris had given him in the back of the Bentley. And nothing. Nada, bubkiss, zip. You got yourself deleted from every single database in existence. We ran the standard biometrics, all the usual digital identifiers, and nothing comes up. He broke off, started reciting. As I was going up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today, Ambler put in. I wish he'd come to play. The ginger-haired man grinned as he misquoted the old nursery rhyme. It won't surprise you to learn that we've got access to all the State Department personnel files. Remember Horace? Ambler nodded. Horace was a giant of a man who worked out too much. His arms dangled away from his torso when he walked, ape-like, and his acne-dappled back indicated steroid abuse. But he could be useful for rough stuff in less than finely tuned stab operations. Ambler had worked with him 3 or 4 times. They were not friends, but they got along fine. Know his real name? Of course not. Those were the rules. We never bent them. I do. Harold Niederman, wrestling champ at his high school in South Bend, did a stint with the SOLIC unit, Special Operations Light Intensity Combat. Got married, got a business degree at a 2-year school in Florida, got divorced, re-enlisted. But the details don't matter. Point is, I can go on about Harold Niederman. Remember Triton? Coppery hair, freckles, oddly narrow wrists and ankles, yet remarkably dexterous at silent kills. He was superb at garroting sentries, slicing throats. The kind of measures resorted to where even a silenced firearm would have been too noisy. Ambler nodded. Triton would be Farrell W. Simmons. The W stands for Wyeth. Army brat. Spent most of his early years in Wiesbaden and most of his teens at the Lawton Public High School near Fort Sill, Oklahoma. This personnel info is all deep down hidden stuff, by the way, not what you get from a casual trawl. But I've got insider privileges. I guess that's clear enough. So it should be easy for me to get the 411 on Tarquin, right? But I got nada. Because you're a magician. The tone of wonderment in his voice was genuine. Which, of course, makes you all the more valuable as an operative. If you're captured, not that you would be, but if it happened, you'd be nothing more than a cipher, a smoke ring, a floater in your eye. Blink and it's gone. Voila. The man who wasn't there. Absolutely nothing would connect you to anyone else. Genius. Ambler paused. He would not disabuse Fenton. Fenton himself was no small game. I got a lot of contacts. An understatement, if anything. Of course, a good magician can make things reappear too, Ambler said carefully. He turned and peered outside. Shoppers tramping past soundlessly, unseeing. He could use Fenton, but had others used him too? If members of the retrieval team had somehow learned of the meeting. But so far there was no sign of it. And you have. You're here, aren't you? But do you have any idea what you're worth to me? According to your former colleagues, you're the closest thing they've ever met to a mind reader, and you officially don't exist. So that's why I feel so empty inside, said Ambler dryly. I'm all about getting the best, Fenton said. I don't know just what you did to get yourself in trouble. Don't know what kind of jam you were in. Don't much care either. I find that hard to believe. Yet Ambler did believe it. You see, Tarquin, I like to surround myself with people who are truly, truly excellent at whatever they do. And you, my friend, are off the charts. I don't know how you managed to do what you did, but you are a man after my own heart. You think I'm a rule breaker. I know you are. Greatness consists in knowing when to break the rules and knowing how. Sounds like you've been putting together the Dirty Dozen. We're bigger than that. You've heard of the Strategic Services Group? Ambler nodded. ARIADNE's thread. Find where it leads. Alongside McKinsey, Bain, KPMG, Accenture, and dozens of others, it was one of those management consulting firms that seemed to offer spurious solutions to spurious problems. He could remember the occasional billboard stationed in the major airports. The initials were big, SSG, the word Strategic Services Group much smaller beneath them. Emblazoned over a scene of perplexed-looking business executives was the slogan, "It's no use having the right answers if you aren't asking the right questions." Glad to hear it, because I'm thinking it's your future. I'm not exactly the MBA type. I'm not going to beat around the bush with you. Here we are in a specially soundproof space, privacy guaranteed by Faraday shielding and wide-frequency RF intercepts. Could not be more private if we were on the moon. And the atmosphere is better. Fenton nodded impatiently. SSG is kind of like this place. It provides one kind of service publicly, but that isn't why it exists. Maybe Osiris started to explain. See, what I am is the showrunner. That's what they call me. Then what's the show? An international management consulting firm. What's that, really? A bunch of people in suits and ties who travel all around the world, racking up the frequent flyer miles. Every major airport in the world is flooded with these guys. Any customs or border control official can recognize a business consultant a mile away. They're pros, look like people who have learned how to live on airplanes. But you know how the ads talk about the SSG difference? Asking the right questions, not just providing the right answers. Ambler recited the advertising slogan. The real difference, though, is that our core team is actually composed of former covert operatives, and not the bottom of the barrel types either. I've been creaming off the best. I've hired the stab boys en masse. So it's like a retirement perk. The provocation was deliberate. They're not retired, Tarquin, the ginger-haired man replied. They're doing what they used to do, better. Difference is now they're free to do their jobs, their real jobs, which is working for you, which is working for freedom, for truth, justice, and the goddamn American way. Just checking, Ambler interjected. But really working? Not filling out paperwork in triplicate and falling on their sword every time they stub the toe of a goddamn foreign national, the way the Washington bureaucrats would have it. When things need to get rough, they get rough. No apologies required. You got a problem with that? Why would I? Let the line out. I had never met an operative who did, Fenton said. My point is, I'm a true blue patriot. But what's always driven me crazy is the way we've let ourselves get shackled by regulation and federal oversight and UN accords and international treaties and what have you. The cautiousness, the timidity of U.S. covert ops is obscene, a form of treason, almost. Our people are the best in the business. Then the bureaucrats put leg irons on them. My thing is, I'm taking those leg irons off. Now let's see what you can do. Reel it in. Which should make you an enemy of the very government you're trying to protect. Ambler's words were pointed, his voice level. You asking whether I'm stepping on government toes? Fenton raised his eyebrows, his weathered forehead sporting four amazingly regular creases, as straight as the creases on a box shirt just back from the laundry. The answer is yes and no. Plenty of pencil necks disapprove, no doubt about it. But there are good men and women in Washington, too. The people who really count, right? The people who count on you. You got it. Fenton glanced at his watch. He had been worried about the time, had assured himself that he remained on schedule. But what schedule? Listen, there's a well-established model for this sort of relationship. I think you know how crucial private military firms, PMFs, have been over the past couple of decades. For auxiliary purposes, backup stuff, sure, Ambler started. Balls! Fenton slapped the incongruously delicate table at the side of his chair. Not sure how long you've been away, but it sounds like you haven't kept up, because it's a brave new world out there. Things got global when Defense Service Limited, Brits, mostly SAS, merged with Armor Holdings, which was an American company. They were guarding embassies, mines, and oil installations in southern Africa, doing special forces training in Indonesia, Jordan, the Philippines. Then it acquires Intersec and Falcon Star. It acquires DSL, moves into risk management services big time, everything from mine clearance to intelligence. Then Armor buys the Russian firm Alpha. Alpha, Ambler knew, was staffed by former members of an elite Soviet division, a Russian counterpart to the U.S. Delta Force. The Spetsnaz of Spetsnaz, Ambler said. Fenton nodded. They buy Defense Systems Colombia, mostly ex-military people from South America. Pretty soon they're one of the fastest growing companies around. Then you've got Group 4 Flak, a Danish corporation, which owns Wackenhut. You've got Levdan and Vinyl and the L3 Communications Group. You've got MPRI, which gave me my original inspiration, Military Professional Resources Incorporated. Just that one firm based in Virginia is what kept peace and stability in Bosnia. You think the Blue Helmets were doing it? Nope, it was MPRI. One day, the Department of Defense's special advisor to the Bosnian Croat Federation retires. Next day, he's working the Balkans again, but for MPRI. It's 1995, and all of a sudden, the Croats, Croatians, are kicking Serbian butt up and down the block. How's that happen? How did this ragtag bunch of incompetents suddenly learn how to execute a textbook-perfect series of assaults against Serbian troop positions? Can you spell MPRI? That's what drove the Serbs to the bargaining table as much as the NATO air raids. It isn't just about privatizing the war. It's about privatizing the peace. Men of the private sector working for the public good. I think we used to call them mercenaries. So what's new? Hell, when Ramses II was fighting the Hittites, he brought in special military advisors from the Numidians. Or what about Xenophon's 10,000? Basically a bunch of retired Greek warriors who hired themselves out to kick Persian ass. Even the Peloponnesian War involved a lot of subcontracting to the Phoenicians. You're telling me it was outsourced? You'll forgive an old war buff for going on about these things, but how can you believe in the genius of the marketplace and the importance of security without wanting to put the two things together? Ambler shrugged. I get the demand. What about the supply? Again, his eyes swept along the terrazzo walkway outside the boutique, then back to the industrialist in front of him. Why was Fenton looking so intently at his watch? Ever wonder what happened to the peace deficit? The American military has a third as many soldiers as it had during the height of the Cold War. We're talking about vast demobilization. Elsewhere, too. South Africa, Britain especially. Whole regiments got cashiered out. What's left? The UN. The UN's a joke. It's like the medieval pope. Lots of papal writs, not a whole lot of bayonets. So we get an army of X's. It's more complicated than that, boyo. I'm not in the military sector anymore. That marketplace got too crowded for my taste. Paul Fenton likes to feel he's making a unique contribution. And you're doing that now? Well, sure. Because SSG isn't competing with the PMFs. They do overt. We do covert. That's the beauty part, see? Ops, not combat. What we're up to is something even more important. We're about covert operations. Think of us as Consular Operations Incorporated. Spies for hire. We're doing God's work, Tarquin. We're making the US of A as strong as she ought to be. So you are and aren't part of the US government. We can do what the US can't. Ben's eyes sparkled. At first, those eyes seemed to be no particular color. Peering more closely, Ambler noticed that one eye was gray and the other green. Oh, sure. Plenty of bureaucrats in Fort Meade and Langley, not to mention Foggy Bottom. are happy to denounce me, like I say, but deep down they're glad I do what I do. With some, I'd imagine it's not very deep down at all. You must have close ties with some pretty high-ranking officers. High-ranking officers including those who know what was done to me and why. Absolutely. Officers that actively enlist our services. It's a matter of outsourcing covert ops to strategic services. All the flavor, none of the calories, Ambler said, forcing down a gorge of revulsion. Zealots like Paul Fenton were all the more dangerous because they viewed themselves in a heroic light. Even as their lofty rhetoric would justify every kind of inhumanity, they quickly lost the ability to distinguish between self-interest and the great cause to which they devoted themselves. They suckled their corporate entities on public funds while sermonizing about the virtues of private enterprise. True believers like Fenton placed themselves above the laws of men, above justice itself, which made them a threat to the very security they prized. Everybody knows that the enemies of freedom, including the free market, are the enemies of Paul Fenton. The industrialist looked grave for a moment. A lot of our operations may seem small, but we're after bigger game now. There was excitement in Fenton's voice. Now we've been given a truly major commission. Is that so? Ambler had to play Fenton carefully. He could not appear overly interested, but he could not be too cool either. A studied dispassion was what he was aiming for. Let the fish swim against the drag. Which is why we need you. What have you heard about me? Ambler asked him, intently studying his face. Lots. Even heard some people think you're a dangerous lunatic. Fenton replied candidly. Then why would you want anything to do with me? Maybe because the government's idea of a dangerous lunatic isn't necessarily mine, or maybe because only a dangerous lunatic would take on the assignment I got for you, and only a dangerous lunatic with your skill set has a chance of completing it. Fenton stopped. So where do I stand with you? Can we do business? Can we help fix this rattletrap world together? What do you make of my enterprise? Be honest. Ariadne, Ariadnes, thread. Where would it lead? Before we met, Ambler said, fingering one of the dresses on a rack, I had no idea what could be done with pleated voile. Fenton's laughter was nasal and high-pitched, almost a cackle. Then he stared at Ambler for a long moment. Tarquin, I'd like you to come with me now. Would you do that? I got something to show you. Glad to hear it, Ambler said, looking around the icy chic of the brushed steel and gray carpeted boutique, because there's nothing here in my size. The two men left the boutique and re-entered the bustling, cavernous world of the underground city. As they made their way down a triple-tiered bank of escalators, Ambler thought about Fenton's curious combination of zealcraft and openness. Few people of his wealth walked around without a sizable entourage. Fenton seemed to pride himself on his self-reliance. It was the same odd mixture of rugged individualism and cosseted self-regard he had displayed in other ways. Maybe it was what made him a mogul in the first place. An enormous poster for the Gap hung below the light well overhead. Everywhere one looked, there were kiosks and shops and lights and shoppers. Through the throngs, Fenton and Ambler pushed through several blocks worth of passageways. Finally, they reached the exit for the Palais des Congrès, Palaisdescongres, at the Ville Marie Expressway. When they rode up a couple of flights of escalators and reached the surface, it was as if they had returned to a cold and icy planet. The Palais des Congrès Convention Center was itself a chilly structure, a leviathan of glass and steel and concrete. Fenton brought Ambler to the sidewalk in front of it. Ambler could see that there were extensive security cordons around the building. What's going on? A meeting of the G7, Fenton said. G7 plus one, really. Trade ministers from all over. The United States, Canada, France, Britain, Italy, Germany, and Japan, plus special guests. A big deal. They never announced the location to head off anti-globalization protesters, but it's never exactly a big secret either. I don't recall having been invited. You're with me, Fenton said, twinkling. Come along. It's going to be something special to watch. High up in the office tower, attached to the glass-sheathed complex Sky Favreau, Joe Lee adjusted his power binoculars. He had received an intelligence warning that his quarry might try to penetrate the international meeting. Next to him was a Chinese sniper rifle, a Type 9.5 7.62 millimeter rifle. It had been carefully zeroed that very morning. At the moment, the man known as Tarquin was visible, exposed. Save for the irregularly gusting wind, Joe Lee had a reasonably good shot. But who was Tarquin with? Joe Lee adjusted his binoculars as he brought into focus the ruddy-faced, powerfully built man who was Tarquin's companion. Act or analyze? It was the ancient dilemma. One could easily perish or allow others to perish while analyzing the options. Yet in this case, Joe Lee wondered whether further intelligence would be required before taking further action. It went against the fiber of his being, the grain of his consciousness. He had been built, selected, and trained to act, a human weapon, Comrade Chow had once called him. Yet effective action was never impetuous, timing was crucial, and so was the ability to adapt and respond to changing circumstances. He removed his finger from within the trigger guard of the rifle and picked up a digital camera, fine-tuning its focus until the image of the ruddy-faced man was centered and sharp. He would send in the image for analysis. Joe Lee seldom experienced fear, but he did feel a faint ping of concern. Liu Eng's enemies, it seemed reasonable to worry, might have found themselves a formidable new asset. He glanced again at the rifle, his misgivings growing by the second. Analyze or act?